Okay, so now we're moving on into the Industrial Revolution. And just like we've kind of been focused on just one particular area at a time throughout the last several units, we're still kind of focused on Europe right now. That'll change next week in the next unit. But for right now, we're still kind of focused on mostly Europe. And we're talking about the Industrial Revolution in Unit 12. So one of the first things that we have to understand is we have to kind of lay the groundwork because we haven't really in your course of social studies, we haven't talked a lot about different forms of government or different forms of economics. And so we want to kind of get straight on a few terms before we go any further. So right here you have a spectrum. And really, you guys have seen a spectrum before. And so a spectrum says there are any different number of things that can exist in varying degrees. And so at the left side of the spectrum, we have here capitalism, free enterprise, Adam Smith, laissez-faire, some different ideas here. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have ideas called communism, socialism, Karl Marx. And anywhere along that spectrum, you could have different sorts of ideas that fall somewhere between these two ideas. And so today, what we're looking at is a spectrum of economics that came out of the Industrial Revolution. And so here we have two very different sorts of ideas. And so as you're looking at the spectrum, I want you to hold these two different boxes, these two sets of ideas, in contrast with each other. And so the first thing we've got on that left box is capitalism. Capitalism is an economic idea that says that individuals should be able to take risk, to be an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is someone who starts something new, that takes on the risk of a new business to start something new. But that entrepreneurs should be able to take risk and start their own business with limited government interference, and that whatever money they make from that belongs to them. That the individual gets to choose what they do with their own money. This plays into the idea of a free enterprise system. Free enterprise means the government does not interfere with the economy, or that the government interferes with the economy as little as possible. So free meaning government doesn't interfere. Enterprise meaning an economic system. Okay, so it's an economic system where the government does not interfere very much at all. We've got this guy, Adam Smith, and Adam Smith is kind of known as the father of capitalism. He wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations. You don't need to know what The Wealth of Nations was necessarily about. You just need to know he wrote a book called Wealth of Nations. He also popularized this idea called the invisible hand. I'm going to write that here for you. The invisible hand. And what Adam Smith said about the invisible hand is he said the market, this place where buyers and sellers come to meet over any good, the market determines the price. The market determines everything. So the invisible hand of the economy will adjust the economy back to where it should be. So prices will never get too high because when the government doesn't interfere, market forces will bring that price back down. Prices will never get too low because competition in a free market, when the government isn't regulating everything, more people are likely to be in business because it costs less money to be in business. And so when you have competition, that forces the price to come up a little bit because folks are working together. And so Adam Smith is an economist. He goes with capitalism. He popularizes this thing called the invisible hand. The invisible hand just means that the economy will kind of self-correct itself. You don't need the strong hand of the government to fix the economy because the economy fixes itself. And then last, we've got laissez-faire. Laissez-faire, and it looks kind of funny written, but laissez-faire is a French word that means hands off. This describes the government approach. Okay, so laissez-faire describes this approach of the government to economics. So if you say a government has a laissez-faire approach to government, you're saying that the government is hands off when it comes to the economy. Okay, so big word, really easy. It means the government is hands off when it comes to the economy. Laissez-faire. On the other hand, you've got ideas called communism, socialism, and then we've got Karl Marx. We'll start with Karl Marx. Karl Marx is a guy who was an economist, a philosopher, a journalist. He kind of did several different things. He wrote stuff, uh, but Karl Marx is known as the father of communism. So if you put Adam Smith with capitalism, you put Karl Marx with communism. And communism is this economic idea that really turns into a governmental idea that the government is heavily involved in economic affairs. Communism goes so far as to say is there is no such thing as private property. Everything belongs to the community. You get community, communism, kind of starts the same. Everything is communal. Everything belongs to the community. Now, the government oversees that community, and so everything belongs, therefore, to the government. Everyone holds all things in common. So it doesn't matter whether you're a cook or a doctor or a teacher or any occupation. Everything is held in common completely. The government has complete control of the economy. Now, if you walk that back a little bit and say that the government controls all of the factors of production, meaning that the government controls all of the production of natural resources, the government controls all of the business in the country, but you can still have private property. That's called socialism. So socialism is kind of a little less extreme than communism, but the two kind of go together. The idea of communism and socialism is that the government has control of the economy. So we'll return to these terms as we move on in the lesson, but now we're going to kind of look at the Industrial Revolution and its key points. So the Industrial Revolution began in the 1700s in Great Britain, and so we know that we talked about the age of exploration was kind of 1450 to 1750, and we talked about all of those natural resources that came from the colonies back into Europe and how Europe sent finished goods. We talked about mercantilism and the growth in the economy. We did really well on our test in that. But the Industrial Revolution begins kind of the tail end of this, and it begins in Great Britain. Other places in Europe do industrialize, and the Industrial Revolution does spread rather quickly, but it begins in Great Britain, and that's going to be important for you to remember. When we think about causes of the Industrial Revolution, there are several, but there are two really important ones that ones that I think are the most important when it comes to Great Britain. First, you have a large colonial empire. Great Britain has colonies, of course, in America, and then in the future all over the world. And so because they have this large colonial empire, they have lots of natural resources that they're bringing into their country. So this isn't necessarily something new information to us. We already do know this. But then also we have advances in agriculture. So as these natural resources are being produced at a higher rate for Great Britain because they have so many colonies, we also have advances in agriculture. It gets easier to farm. They're able to produce more crops. This also drives the Industrial Revolution forward. We've got a lot of material to work with here. And so the Industrial Revolution begins with a few inventions. The first one is the spinning jenny. And the spinning jenny basically allows you to kind of automate the process of making fabric. You're able to weave multiple strands together more quickly than before. This isn't like a gas-powered or electric-powered machine, but it is a technological advance that allows you to spin cloth much more quickly. And so the textile industry is the first industry to industrialize or become truly an industry. And textile meaning any fabric that is produced, like clothing, etc. That's textile. Next, you've got James Watt and the steam engine. This is one you're definitely going to want to remember is James Watt and the steam engine. You might get confused. Like we're going to also talk about the light bulb. And if you think watt sounds like wattage, like a light bulb, then you might get thrown off here. But James Watt invented the steam engine. And so a watt is a measure of power. And so when we're talking about watts, you can think about the steam engine. And the steam engine basically created mechanical energy from boiling water, creating steam. And so this is something that also drives production. And so you can get these steam engines in boats, you can get it in factories. And so this is what allows us to continue to create things at a greater pace, because we're not just using horsepower, we're not just using human power, we're now using steam power. What happens is production moves from homes to factories. Before this, the production of goods primarily happened in people's homes. This is something that's called cottage industry. I'll write it here for you. Cottage industry. People produced things at home. You didn't have to go to a factory or a central location because there wasn't specialized equipment to make everything. People were making things out of their homes. And so when the Industrial Revolution happens and we get factories starting, people move that production from their homes to the factories because the factories have specialized equipment and people at the factories have specialized jobs. And so you only do your specific job. You don't make a shoe from start to finish. You make your part of the shoe and you send it down the line, and other people do their part of the shoe. And so we've got a few words here that I want you to remember. So cottage industry is one. Mass production is another. We are producing things incredibly quickly and in very large quantities. That's mass production. The factory system, we're no longer producing things in homes. We're producing them in factories, and it's a very systematized process. And then you have child labor. We're moving at such a quick rate. There are not enough adults to staff all these factories to produce all of these goods. And so what do we use? Children. Is that a good thing? Not necessarily, but it does happen. So one of the results of all of this is more people move to the cities. We've got advances in agriculture, so it doesn't take as many farmers to produce everything that we need agriculturally. There are more jobs in these factories. And so people move from kind of the country into cities because that's where jobs are, that's where industry is, that's where more housing is now. And so we get cities are growing because of this industrialization. We've got things like steamboats and railroads. So we've got huge advances in transportation that are happening here. We've got the dawn of capitalism. So we are going to go back now to what we talked about with Adam Smith, capitalism, free enterprise, laissez-faire. The economy is booming at this point in Great Britain. They are producing tons of goods. They are making tons of money. And so the idea of capitalism, that people should start new businesses, they should take risk, they should be entrepreneurs, because in this world, there's the opportunity for you to make lots of money, and the government isn't going to regulate all of it, is very attractive because now you can make more money than you ever could before because of this industrial revolution. Also, we have a reaction against some of these things. The world is changing, just like in today. We've got lots of new technology coming, and people are reacting against influences in technology. Like maybe some of your teachers really hate cell phones and hate netbooks and things like that. And because of this advance in technology, there's a kind of a harsh reaction against it. Like, no, you won't have cell phones in my class. So what happens with this industrial revolution is there's kind of a reaction against it. We get reform movements. A lot of these reform movements are really based on workers' rights. So they're talking about working conditions for workers. They're talking about child labor laws and prohibiting children from working in factories. All of these things start to come about after the Industrial Revolution really gets going. People want to be treated, workers want to be treated like they're humans, not just like they're parts of the factory. And then we get this idea called communism that comes from it. The world is making tons of money, but who in a system like this makes the most money? It's the entrepreneur. It's the person who took the risk in the beginning. It's the person who owns the factory, the person who is the boss that really gets to make a lot of the money. Who doesn't get to make a ton of money is the middle class, the people who are working in the factories. Karl Marx, our father of communism, called this middle class the proletariat. And they are the working class. That's what proletariat means. And Karl Marx thought the proletariat, the working class of people, maybe a middle or lower class of folks, that they really were the ones who were driving the economy forward. That other people owned what they made, but you have to have the workers for any of this to work. And so what he was in favor of was holding all things in common, representing the common person, the working person. And so this is where the idea of communism comes in, is that it's this reaction against capitalism for the working class. And then as we go down, we've got some different inventors here that'll be important for you to remember. You've got on the left here, this is Thomas Edison, famous for the light bulb. You've got Alexander Graham Bell, famous for the telephone. You've got Marie Curie, famous for radiology. She discovered radium, so she's an important name. And then you've got Louis Pasteur, and let's see if I can spell his name correctly. And he is famous for coming up with the idea of germ theory, that people get sick because of germs. And so he becomes very influential in the creation of vaccines, medicine, and also popularized the idea of you should wash your hands. So this is maybe one of the greatest contributions to human society ever, comes out of the Industrial Revolution from Louis Pasteur. And so we look at our most important box. There are a ton of words here: industrialism, communism, factory system, mass production, laissez-faire, child labor, entrepreneurs, urbanization, free enterprise.